Hello, and welcome to the People Tested podcast with your host, Jack Tatar.
Hi, this is Jack Tatar. Welcome to the August 2015 People Tested podcast. Today we've got an exciting show for you. First is my interview with a good friend of mine, Philip Sachs-Pilvenis, on her radio show, Winning at Life, where I discuss my latest book, Having the Talk. And then later on, we'll complete the two-part interview that I did with Diana Denholm around her book, The Caregiving Wife's Handbook. But first, let's listen to the interview with Phyllis, where I discuss my latest book, Having the Talk, The 4 Keys to Your Parents' Safe Retirement.
Intelligent Talk 960, The Patriot. Welcome back to Living Your Life with Phyllis Sachs-Pilvenis. This morning, our guest is Jack Tatar, known as America's Safe Retirement Coach. He is also the author of 3 books. Jack takes a holistic approach to retirement that considers not only the financial aspects of the retirement, but the need to also focus on health, wellness, mental attitude, and staying involved as keys to living a long and safe retirement. His first 2 books, Safe for Retirement, The 4 Keys to a Safe Retirement, and The 10 Joys of a Safe Retirement, both reached number 1 on Amazon in personal health and personal finance categories. His most recent book is Having the Talk, The 4 Keys to Your Parents' Safe Retirement. In it, he provides a plan for adult children and their parents to discuss the vital issues of retirement and later life. Jack is a former financial advisor and currently the CEO of GEM Research Solutions, a leading market research firm focused primarily on the financial services industry. He's also a frequent speaker on the topic of retirement and has been involved with numerous startups. He has an MBA from Pepperdine University and a BA from Stony Brook, and he currently resides in New Jersey. Jack, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here.
Good morning, Jack. How are you?
Hi, Phyllis. How are you? It's very great to hear you again.
Yeah, same here. By the way, I didn't realize, I don't know, it passed me by last time. You're from New Jersey. What part?
I live right outside of Princeton, New Jersey.
You've got to be kidding me. I went to high school in East Brunswick.
Did you really?
I'll be there in about 3 weeks. Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah, I'm in Pennington. I'm right near where Washington crossed the Delaware.
Oh, historic at that.
Yes.
Well, Jack, turning to other things, we can catch up in another point, but
Absolutely.
In your bio, you wrote that after experiencing deep personal tragedies, you took a new path to examine the realities of your retirement. Since I shared my story today, what happened and what did you learn and how did that get you on this path?
Well, Phyllis, when I was listening to your story, it brought back a lot of recollections of what happened with me, but I guess I'd have to say that probably about 3 years ago, I never thought I'd be writing a book about retirement or talking to people about retirement. It wasn't on the radar for me. I had done a lot of work as a financial advisor, obviously, and a lot of work in the financial services industry. But what happened was, about 3 years ago, my mom and dad died within 6 months of each other.
Oh, wow.
And, suddenly, tragically, my dad passed away, and 6 months later, my mom passed away. And trying to recover from that and make sense of that, I had a lot of discussions with people where they said, well, that happens all the time. And I started to say, well, and I'm a researcher, so I started to say, well, if that happens all the time, why does it happen all the time? And I tried to make sense out of this, and I started to examine their life, and I started to take a look at a lot of the research that I had done in the area of retirement. And basically what I came up with, which is was the impetus for my first book, which was to view retirement and later life as really consisting of 4 aspects. We spend so much time thinking about retirement as just being about finances. And if you go to the bookstore and you look for something on retirement, all you see are things about finances. And the reality is retirement's about, and later life is about, not only being financially prepared, but it's about health and wellness, it's about your attitude, and it's about staying involved. And those were 4 aspects that I looked at my parents' life and I thought, and I realized that they were very important to their well-being, but there were some shortcomings in how they had defined their life and structured their life that I think impacted the reason why ultimately my mom passed away 6 months after my dad. So writing the book was my intent to kind of get that message out there, make some sense of it, and hopefully to help some people, which from the feedback I've gotten, it has been relatively positive.
That's awesome. It's a sad way to have an aha moment. I'm sorry about that, but that you'll help a lot of people reaching out, because that's so true. It's not just about your money; it's about your health and having a life after retirement. I often think about that. My goodness, my hobbies beyond exercise are pretty much investments.
Right.
In order to transition into retirement, I better get my act together, right?
Right.
I'll be working to the day I die.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's okay. You can keep working, but just make sure that you take care of those other aspects as well.
Yeah, that's true. But you have to have a plan. Whatever that is, you have to have a plan and still feel like you're viable.
Right. Well, a plan is a foundation, and it's not just a financial plan, and I know you know this. It's not just a financial plan. It's also a plan for all those other aspects, your health, your attitude, and how you're going to stay involved. And all those things can be plans that, much as you review your financial plan on a yearly basis, you can review these plans as well on a regular basis.
Very, very important, good point. I want to discuss your new book, Having the Talk, The 4 Keys to Your Parents' Safe Retirement. I, too, know how difficult this conversation can be.
Right.
So would you explain what that talk is and why it's so important that you have it earlier rather than later?
Yes. And this is, when I bring this topic up to people, they say invariably someone has a story. Everyone has a story about either something that happened in their family or to a friend of theirs or something. But what we're finding is that typically the talk, and let me just mention a little bit about what the talk consists of. When we think about this talk, a lot of people say, well, it's related to long-term care, or what are my parents going to do after they pass away? Those are one aspect of it. There's also aspects related to things like the will, estate planning, medical proxies, as you mentioned, trust, even caregiving challenges. Who is going to be taking care of someone should something happen? But then there's also items related to health issues. How are you going to live in retirement? How are you going to stay involved? All these things are part of the talk, and the talk is not just something that happens in one sitting. It happens over time. You asked the question about why should we have it earlier rather than later. Invariably, people have this talk, but typically it's done too late when we find that our parents have some mental or physical challenges, or perhaps there's some expectations on the part of siblings. So it's better to have it earlier so that you are dealing with your parent at their full capacities. And what's interesting is I've done some work with a professor out of Texas Tech who actually proved that at the age of 60, our financial literacy actually decreases, but our level of confidence increases. So as we get older, our financial literacy drops, but our confidence rises, and that can be the real recipe for financial disaster. So by having this discussion and having a plan put into place early, you can kind of circumvent that happening. So that's another reason for having this talk earlier rather than later.
Yeah, I agree with you. I can't tell you how many countless stories, and as an advisor, where you've seen circumstances where after the fact, after things happen, they have the talk, and then it's just downhill from there. I remember specifically one couple, they lived in a beautiful home. Husband took great pride in the home, fixing it, doing everything. Well, his health started to deteriorate, and the family had to come together, loving family, and just really tell him that he had to sell the house, that they had to move. He and his wife had to move into an assisted living facility. Well, they resented it. They'd never thought about it before. They resented it. They hated it, and both of them died within a year. Very sad.
Right. And these are stories that, quite honestly, are great ways to begin the conversation. Everyone, or most people, have a story like they've heard, like you've just said, and it can be a great way to bring up the topic with your parents, or for your parents to bring it up with you. It can be an example that happened to someone or a story. Those can often be the great conversation starters to getting the talk started.
Good point.
It is a good point. And we need to take a break. You're listening to Living Your Life with Phyllis Sachs-Pilvinas on Intelligent Talk 960 The Patriot. Welcome back to Living Your Life with Phyllis Sachs-Pilvinas. This morning our guest is Jack Tatar. He is America's Safe Retirement Coach and author of 3 retirement books. The most recent is Having the Talk, The 4 Keys to Your Parents' Safe Retirement.
Jack, before the break, we were talking about a great way to bring this conversation up, using life's experiences, people that your parents know that had these circumstances happen, just a great way to bridge the subject. So once you've bridged it, What's the talk about? Break down what people should be talking about. There's a lot of components.
Well, there's a lot of different components to it, and I go back to what I found with my first book, that there's really what I call 4 keys to later life issues, and that should be incorporated into this talk. And I structure them in such a way that we do end up talking about things like wills, estates, trusts, health issues, and all of those types of things. But I break it down into 4 categories. And these can be topics that some of them can be difficult to talk about. Some of them can be relatively easy to talk about. And some of them you already know the answers to from just having conversations with your parents. But the 4 aspects are: 1 is financial preparedness. Now, that's where you have discussions about a will. Perhaps have you done financial plans in the past? When was the last time you updated certain things in your retirement account? All those things that are really the foundation for later life and living in retirement. And all of those things allow you to gather all of that financial information, as well as points of contact for where your accounts are and any estate planning considerations. The next aspect is health and wellness, and that's where you really can have a discussion with your parents about what they're doing to either improve or maintain their health. It's totally okay to ask them about their exercise plans, their dietary plans, as well as a very important thing, and I learned this from my own experience, is to have a record of their doctor and medication types of information.
Really
Then there's the area of mental attitude, which is really talking about what do you want to do in retirement, and then there's staying involved, where you get into the detail of really what are you going to spend your time doing. So those are the 4 aspects, and I lay this out in my book. I've got questions that you can talk about, but these are all the aspects. It's not just about where's the will and what are you doing with your estate plans. It's all of these other aspects as well, because you want to take care of the well-being of your parents and make sure that they're around for as long as possible.
If you don't have your health, you don't have your wealth. But I do want to go back to that financial aspect with everybody. It's just human nature that it's very difficult to talk about the financial issues. And with kids talking to their parents, they oftentimes really struggle with it because they don't want their parents to think that, geez, they want their money. But having so couple things. Number one, I want to point out one thing that certainly shouldn't be overlooked are those powers of attorney for finance and health care. Really making sure that those are written correctly, they're up to date, and that they be accepted by the institutions that your parents have their accounts at. That's number one. And number two, I would like to ask you, how do you what are some ways to bridge this? Because people are uncomfortable talking about money.
Oh, well, it can often be the hardest decision or hardest discussion you're going to have. And I will tell you, and I've been in the research area for a number of years, over a decade, and I would tell you that 10 years ago, if you talk to people, retired people, and you brought up the topic of discussing finances with their children, they would say, no way. The reality is more and more people are doing this because more and more people are seeing the complexities that are in place, the complexities about regulations, the complexities about documentation, the taxation complexities. All these complexities, they provide a burden on people. And so many parents have seen their friends impose this burden on their children because they didn't take care of this early. So they're starting to say, you know what, I need to have this discussion with my children about it because I don't want to have happen what happened to my friend have happened to them. Now, there are also situations where no matter what happens, you may not be able to have that discussion. You may have siblings who fight, or you may have parents who just aren't going to have that discussion with their children. There are certain times when a third party, and this may be an advisor or maybe an estate planner, an estate attorney, there may be times when a third party may have to play this role and get this information together as well. So as much as I'd love it to just be a conversation between the adult children and the parent, the most important thing is to make sure that these things are laid out and taken care of. And I've seen situations with advisors of your caliber where they've come in and stepped in and perhaps played a role as a mediator or as a third-party person to handle a lot of these discussions as well.
We recently had a situation with clients of mine that their parents wouldn't have that discussion. So they brought them in to me without the kids there, and they were forthcoming, and we were able to help do it.
All right, we need to take a break. You're listening to Living Your Life with Phyllis Sachs-Pilvinus on Intelligent Talk, 960 The Patriot.
Thanks for Phyllis for having me on her show. Now I'd like to go to the second part of the two-part interview that I did with Diana Denholm around her moving book, The Caregiving Wife's Handbook. Moving ahead, have you seen examples? One of the things that I'm intrigued by, and one of the things I advocate with my readers and as I do speaking engagements, is to try and involve the adult children as much as possible with their parents to help them with some of these thoughts and considerations as they get older. Have you seen situations, or would you make any advisements in terms of involving adult children in these conversations with their parents?
Absolutely. It's going to start with the parents sitting down and coming up with the list of the things that they want to talk about, so that they can have their basis for the discussion set before they then meet with the kids. Mm-hmm. And with the kids, you can ask them to come up with issues or concerns or things that they want to talk about. But all those steps that I took you through that you learned in the handbook are the same ones you would use with the kids. Right. In terms of, I'd like to, or your dad and I, or your mom and I would like to talk with you about some of the financial issues. Would next Sunday work? Would you, can we meet at the park? Whatever the situation is, you do the very same thing and come up with those, with the same kinds of agreements. The procedure, it's a 6-step procedure for conflict resolution and problem solving, and it's the same no matter who you're dealing with or what the circumstance. So absolutely involve anyone who is going to be impacted by the death. I mean, it could be other than children. There could be siblings of the sick person who for some reason are going to have some involvement where you need to bring them in as well.
Let me talk a little bit about your book is so interesting in terms of dealing not only with your husband's situation, but also with you and the caregiver, and what the caregiver has to pay attention to, the caring for yourself, as you mentioned in your title. Talk to me a little bit about the thing that I've seen with people as they get older and they encounter illness with a loved one is if they don't have a good attitude, and obviously caregiving can really present challenges in terms of your ability to have a positive attitude. But not only that challenge, but the need to have a social structure and to have friends around you and to have that level of support. Talk to me a little bit about the importance of friends and the social structure in terms of how it helps not only your ability to care for a loved one, but the ability for you to care for yourself and to kind of help you in getting through all of this, all of the challenges involved with caregiving.
It's very important. One of the difficulties with self-care is the caregiver giving themselves permission to do it. In fact, I'm starting to refine that concept. When we think of self-care, caregivers hate hearing about that. Of course I know about self-care. Please stop telling me I need to take care of myself. I would if I could. I don't have the time, all these kinds of things. I like to now rephrase that as self-kindness, that we would be as kind to ourselves as we would to a friend, and that makes it less of a demand or a requirement. Self-care, that's something like, if I'm doing it right, I'm caring for myself. Self-kindness is easier. But permission is such a big issue. If we are the really good caregiver, we're totally selfless, we've been taught that we are selfish if we put any emphasis on ourselves. So there's a dynamic that's built in from the time we're kids to not take care of ourselves. We also, as caregivers, get so enmeshed in the care of our loved ones. Let me tell you a little bit about Ed and Betsy. They were, this darling little couple, and from the very beginning, they were very, very close, and it was very wonderful. They had been married for 40 years, and Betsy learned that Ed had emphysema, and she was devastated, but angry with him that he got it. She had been very active, had an interesting life, and she loves it. His job allowed them to spend time together. He could do chores and build things, and everything was wonderful. Well, that's the way it was. But now it's just Betsy doing everything and taking care of all of Ed's needs. But here's the interesting and the important point, and this is all about self-care and having friendships and all of that you're talking about. Ed is still able to do most everything for himself, and he doesn't need much help. It's just that Betsy knows a good wife doesn't let a sick husband do those things for himself. So like most caregiving wives, and it's more typical for women than it is for the men, and I can tell you why later, she just plunged herself into her husband's care because his life's at stake. So now her life is buried in to-do lists for Ed. She no longer does any of her favorite activities, partly because she doesn't have the time, and partly because she doesn't have the energy. Yet she won't accept help from anybody, paid or otherwise. She thinks it's too much trouble to explain what they should do, and they're not going to do it right anyway. So to be beyond exhausted. And in that process, as a side note, she's harming Ed. With the best of intentions, all this enabling that she's doing turns Ed into a physical and emotional invalid. So doing everything for her husband takes away his chances to feel like a man anymore, to feel proud of himself, and to stay physically fit. So if you stop taking on all these excess roles, your workload is going to decrease, your anger and your stress will subside, you're going to have fewer arguments and more effective communication, you'll have much more time for yourself, and your home will become much more peaceful, and you'll be able to function within as much of your normal life as you did before. Still seeing friends, still doing activities, because that is important. If you were the kind of person who only had one or two good friends, you still need to do that. If you were the kind of person, who likes larger groups, you still need to do that. Because caregivers tend to get isolated.
Right.
And in that isolation, the mental things that go on are not pretty.
Right.
And we need places to have normalcy. One of the things I mentioned in the handbook is how we sort of become numb. We're so used to all this trauma and tragedy day in and day out. There's the ambulance ride, or there's one more operation, or there's one more fall, or one more bleed out, that becomes our normalcy, and we forget what the normal world is like. And there's a lot of stuff out there in the normal world that's awfully nice and pleasant and pretty and good for us. So yes, critically important to still stay involved in that, and the way we can do that is to give ourselves permission to do it. And even if that permission is simply that, well, I'll be a better caregiver if I do that, that's okay. That's not the ideal reason, but whatever works.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I think it's a great point, because I think what this whole giving permission is a very important thing. I feel that it's very important for a senior person retired to still stay involved, to have those organizations, that involvement with things that they care about, time spent for themselves and to help others, volunteering types of things. I think what you're saying is very important, because it would seem to me, as a lot of people who are involved with caregiving, it can be such an overwhelming responsibility that it overtakes everything, and you basically say, I no longer have time to be on that committee at church, or I no longer have time to go help out at the soup kitchen. And I think what I'm hearing you say is it's important to still stay involved in these other activities, and to keep this involvement with things outside of just taking care of the caregiving role that you have.
Absolutely. And there are many good reasons for doing it, but one is when you're out there in that kind of normal world, you can see some positive outcomes. You can see some nice change. You can see some accomplishment. Because when you're at home, what you're watching is a person dying, and there's not going to be a good outcome for that. Whereas these other activities, if it's the volunteering, the soup kitchen or whatever it is, you're seeing, some positive outcomes, whether it's once a week or whatever it might be. And that's really beneficial.
Right. You mentioned before how caregiving can be different for for men and women, husbands and wives. Talk to me a little bit more about that. Where have you seen some of the differences, and how have you seen how men perhaps cope with this differently than women?
It's kind of an interesting dynamic, and it's somewhat with our biology, our biological imperative, as they would call it. Women, by nature, are nurturers. That's the function, that's the role with childbearing and raising kids. Men are fixers, problem solvers, and so a man approaches the wife's illness as, this is something I need to fix, and he works on fixing it. And that has a good and bad side. The bad side, obviously, is that he can't fix it. So very often men will have more depression, and it's more common for men caregivers to leave marriages. And I would guess that's some of the reason for it. But in that trying to fix it, also men seem to be able to separate their caregiving from who they are. It's still, and there's a lot of literature on this, at this point it's still considered a little bit of a novelty for a man to be a caregiver. Men have the fortunate position that because it's slightly a novelty, people think they're wonderful. Oh, look at Joe. He's so, wonderful in taking care of his wife. And they're more willing, and particularly women, are more willing to offer help to this male caregiver. I'm also starting to do a little research on affairs, and I'm thinking that men are probably offered to be in affairs more than the women are, because these retiree women, widows out there in the wings are, kind of lining up the next husband. That sounds terrible, but it probably has some truth to it. So the male caregiving experience is a little bit different. I'm not saying it's easy, because it's certainly not, and that doesn't mean to take away at all from them. Whereas women, being nurturers, this is our expected role. We are doing what a wife should do. So there is not as much help offered, because, well, not only are we expected to do it, we certainly should know how. Whether we've ever been a nurse or not, we supposedly know how to change a catheter and, do all that kind of stuff. And more typically, a woman is going to receive criticism. Everybody else is going to jump in and say, well, no, you're doing it wrong. Whereas the man, in that same circumstance, would be offered help. The woman is offered criticism. And, so it's a very different experience, I think, for a woman caregiver for a man, particularly when it's for a spouse.
Right.
When you're caring for a parent, the differences may not be as extreme.
Let me come back to this point about involving family. And I know in the book there's this discussion about this gentleman, Paul Gilkey, and this whole point about the well-meaning family. Talk to me a little bit about that and why that's so important for any caregiver to understand.
Okay. Well, let me tell you about Stan and Marcia.
Okay.
They were both widowed and in their 40s when they met, and she had 3 children, he had 2, and they quickly merged their families into one nice, happy one. And they're retirees in their 70s now. And he's a cheerful sort, and he always seems to see the good in people and in life. So even though he struggles with cancer, he remains pretty pleasant to everyone. And that, of course, that's always easier for the sick person to do with outsiders than it is with their caregiver. But, Marcia's kind of used to that. But for Marcia, Stan's health is the biggest project of her life. She picks his doctors and treatment plans and oversees everything about him. She sets up the house so it's comfortable for him, so he can stay there until he passes. She selects his food, clothing, exercise plans, and social activities. Really pretty much everything about and for him. And that works wonderfully when just the 2 of them are home. But children, relatives, and friends do come to visit. And when they visit, and you caregivers out there know this is true, they ask incessant questions and second guess everything you do. Why are you doing it this way? Why don't you try it that way? Are you sure this is the best for him? Why isn't he seeing Dr. X? She's supposed to be the best. And you caregivers remember thinking, who do they think they are? They aren't living this. They just come and go, and they think they know what it's really like. Why are they asking all these stupid questions and butting in? Don't they think I've got a brain? some days I want to throw the food at them or just throw them out of the house. In fact, I tend to call them the Budinskis. Well, as a caregiver, Paul Gilkey could relate to that. He lived in a small town in Ohio, and he was the primary caregiver for his wife, Darlene. She was dying of cancer. Well, one day his two sisters-in-law and his son came to visit. And at lunchtime, as he did most days, he peeled an orange for her. Well, the sisters-in-law stepped in and decided that she should have tea and toast. Well, of course, this wasn't the first of many times that they had butted in, but that day, 3 hours after a big fight started, Paul shot the two ladies and his son and killed them. Now, this was a tragic case, and he had been a convicted murderer, so yes, there was background for it, but look at what the small incident was that pushed the caregiver over the top. Tea and toast versus an orange. So, this is why it's such a critical issue. So Marcia's sister visited her, and she noticed how stressed Marcia was, so she decided to give her a copy of the Caregiving Wife's Handbook. And there she learned that she could gain insights so that she could anticipate, to understand and prevent these situations, the ones that cause the greatest stress, and that would stop her from having satisfying and fulfilling relationships with her loved ones. So she quickly learned that, and this is really important, that these behaviors from family members are to be expected. So she learned what to do and say, and again, using those tools we talked about, and some other ones when others express their opinions. As an example, I realize you think that she should have tea and toast today. However, we've decided that the orange is what is more appropriate for her. And to realize that adult children in particular may have a need and feel that they have a right to know everything that's going on and to be in charge of it. And this is to be expected and respected, but not necessarily acted upon. And that's where the difference lies. So somebody else's need does not translate to being our loved one's need. So we also don't need to make somebody else wrong for us to be right.
Right.
Using all of these communication tools, yes, thank you for sharing your idea. It can be some comment as simple as that. So we anticipate it. So all these people want to come and tell us how to do and
Right.
what to do, and know that that's normal. So rather than taking offense at it and thinking, why are they singling me out, know that in a sense, that's kind of their job in their head. And we can respect that, but we don't have to do what they say. And
Right.
we can respond to them in a way that will still keep relationships good.
Yeah, I think that's a very valuable point, because there's more and more I look at the need for adult children to be involved with their parents and helping them. There's always that line in terms of help and assistance and not taking control of the situation and still respecting that the mother and father have control of the situation, especially in a caregiving situation. Diana, let me ask you, are there certain resources, organizations, specific websites? I know you're going to tell us about your website, and I want to hear more about that, but are there specific resources that people can turn to now to get information, general information or specific information on what you consider to be valuable information for caregiving?
One of the best sites is the Well Spouse Association site. I think it's wellspouse.org. This is the only peer-to-peer, non-disease specific support group out there. It's international now, and they have a wonderful website, and they have a wonderful forum. And on that forum, once you join it, I believe it's free to join, but you do have to join up before you can be on the forum. You can say anything. You can get information. It is for the well spouse. One of their mottos, and I might not say it exactly right, but it's basically, when one is sick, two need help. So it is for the caregiver of a spouse, for the person who is well, and they have wonderful information. Actually, I'm going to be the keynote speaker at their conference in October in Washington,
terrific.
D.C.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So that one's very good. Yes, mine is wonderful, caregivingwife.com, but it's not just wonderful because it's mine or that's all about me, but it has resources on it. It does have, organization, direct links to certain organizations, WellSpouse being one of them. It has links on it to helping articles, articles that are on caregiving so that you can gain information on various topics. This broadcast is going to be a direct link on the website so that people can, go back and hear this information again and again and again. There are governmental websites so that you can have specific questions answered. In the back of the Caregiving Wife's Handbook, there is an unusual section on resources. I don't like regular resource sections at ends of books because they're outdated. So what you learn to do in the Caregiving Wife's Handbook is how to go on the computer and find what you need. And I've made it, very straightforward in terms of these are the steps. This is what it means. This is what you can ignore. You really don't need to know what http:// is all about. You can ignore stuff like that. And I explain that, in that kind of terminology so that you can do the searches online so you'll have the most current information because, they might have the address for, let's say, the Arthritis Foundation in the back of a book, and they've moved, but online you can get it. So you learn how to get to all these resources with the instructions in the back of the handbook.
Okay, great. Well, I want to hear more specifically about the book, how to get it, what's the place to get it. But before I do, and I think it's a wonderful book, and I think it's something that everyone out there, even if you're not involved directly with caregiving, but if you feel that there's a need to know about this for your friends, for your family, even for adult children to take a look at this. There's a lot of great information in there. But Diana, ultimately, what message would you hope that not only wives, caregiving wives, but that even adult children and even husbands, what is the message that you'd like them to take away from this wonderful book of yours?
I guess there are several, but they're connected. One is that, your life and your relationships do not have to be over even though you're a caregiver. Because in caregiving, often damage and destruction happens to people and relationships, and that doesn't have to happen. Ways around that will be absolutely using these communication tools, using collaboration, the self-kindness. These things will be what gets you through it. One of the tools in the handbook that you'll find are 50 do's and don'ts, and they're just very simple things that you can go in. I'll just one off the top of my head. Don't feel guilty that you still have a life and can still have fun. Life may not always seem fair, but that doesn't mean life is wrong.
Right. That's great. Diana, how do we get the book? How do we get our hands on the book? What's the best way of getting the book? And also just remind people again about your website, which I think is a wonderful website and provides some great resources for people.
Thank you. The website is caregivingwife.com. You can put the www in front of it, but you don't always have to. On that, it's a little icon that says Buy Now, and you can click that. Or you can go to Amazon.com. Barnes & Noble has it. Hunter House, the publisher, has it. So there are many ways to get it. It is in bookstores. Barnes & Noble is carrying it. But as we know, more and more the books that you order online. And any moment now, it's going to be an e-book.
That's great.
We've been waiting since March for it to be an e-book, and it's going to be momentarily. You will be able to get the e-book.
That's great. And it sounds like you may be doing some updates to it, or writing some additional books as well around the topic.
Well, what I do write regularly articles for Psychology Today, and PBS has a new website that's Next Avenue, and I write regularly for them. But I am doing some research right now to do a Caregiving Husband's Handbook, And that one will be titled, if they let me keep the title, Superman Faces Kryptonite.
I love it. I love it. Diana, it's been an absolute pleasure to be speaking with you. For all of you out there listening, once again, the book is called The Caregiving Wife's Handbook, Caring for Your Seriously Ill Husband, Caring for Yourself. Diana B. Denholm is the author. Fabulous book. Need to get your hands on it. Diana, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I look forward to speaking to you again, and hopefully after the Superman book is written or at some point in time getting together and talking again.
Thank you, and I appreciate all that you're doing with your website and your programs, because you're providing valuable information, not just my book, but such wonderful information for retirees that they wouldn't otherwise receive. So thank you to you.
I appreciate that, Diana. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much for joining us for this broadcast of Your Safe Retirement. This is Jack Tatar. We'll speak to you again. Thank you. I'd like to thank Diane for being part of the People Tested podcast. You can find Diane's book, The Caregiving Wife's Handbook, on Amazon and at your local bookstore. Thanks so much for tuning in. Next month, we have another exciting show involving some authors from the People Tested family, so tune in. And as always, visit our website at www.peopletested.com to see the latest news about our People Tested family of authors, including videos, audios, and the latest books, including our series of books called the What's the Deal with books. Thanks for tuning in. As always, if you have any questions, you can always reach me at jack@peopletested.com. Thanks very much.